For the last 40 years, the U.S. has been fighting a war on drugs. It's cost more than $1 trillion and led to more than 45 million arrests. So has the drug problem in America gotten any better, or is the issue being approached the wrong way? Those are the questions a new documentary is trying to answer. Here's a clip from the house I live in.
Watching arrest after arrest, I began to see for the first time the destructive impact of drug laws not only on those they target, but on those who enforce them as well.
The problem is that cop that made that cheap drug arrest, he's going to get paid. He's going to get the hours of overtime for taking the drugs down to ECU. He's going to get paid for processing the prisoner down at central booking. He's going to get paid for sitting back at his desk and writing the paperwork for a couple hours. And he's going to do that 40, 50, 60 times a month so that his base pay might end up being only half of what he's actually paid as a police officer.
Most important thing right here.
We're paying a guy for stats.
Joining us this morning, the documentary's director, Eugene Jarecki. Eugene, good morning to you.
Great to be here.
Let's talk about the banner message of the movie. This is one of the things that you talk about right off the top. The war on drugs was never about drugs.
Right.
So what is the war on drugs all about?
Well, unfortunately, declaring war on something like drugs, it's like declaring war on terror. You can't declare war on terror. You're declaring war on those we associate with terror. Well, the same is true of drugs. It was always a war on people. It was those we associate with drugs. And in the modern era, disproportionately, that has been African Americans. They were the primary target of the drug war that we've been living with for 40 years now.
You have a personal connection to this topic. It goes back to your childhood. What is that? How did that motivate you in making this film?
Sure. Well, I'm a comfortable white American, but I was surrounded as a young person by black families and friends who I knew, people I grew up alongside and played with. One person's family was the family of my housekeeper. And every white person always has a story about my housekeeper. Well, in my case, my housekeeper shaped my life in a lot of ways. She was very much a second mother to my brothers and myself. Her name is Nanny Jeter. And as I watched Nanny grow, as I was growing up, as I watched her go on in life, I learned from her that so much was going wrong in her family. So many of the kids I'd grown up alongside, I suddenly discovered were confronting obstacles that I wasn't. I was having a life of great opportunity. They were stumbling over one obstacle after another. And the more I learned about it, the more it became clear to me that incarceration, the mass incarceration of black Americans, and especially under our drug laws, was the primary motor for that tragedy.
Speaking of incarceration, there's this incredible disparity between sentencing when it comes to cocaine and crack, even though essentially they're the same drugs. Why is that, and what's the difference?
Well, you can ascribe motives, and a lot of people saw racism in it because historically, crack cocaine was punished 100 times more severely than powder. So if you were walking down the street with 5 grams of crack cocaine, and I was walking down the street with powder cocaine, I would need 100 times as much powder cocaine, 500 grams, to get the same sentence as you, even though it is chemically exactly the same drug. And now I'm walking down the street with a huge crime, with a huge street value. You're walking down the street with a petty crime, we get the same sentence. So people over time said, why was this born? Was it racist in origin? I don't know how to speculate on that, but I can tell you that Congress was told year after year, decade after decade, by judges, by experts, by medical experts, and others who said this makes no sense, it's wrong scientifically, it's morally wrong, and look what it's doing to the black community. And time after time, Congress said, we don't think it's broke, we're not going to fix it. Well, when you take that view and you hear about the inherent racism in a law and you don't fix it, at that point, Congress leaves its motivations open to question.
Well, one thing we do know for sure, the U.S. imprisons more of its own people than any other country in the world. Yeah. You talk about it like this. You say the prison system is an industrial complex. You describe it that way. How is that? Why?
Well, Dwight Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, and I made an earlier film called Why We Fight, about what that did to get us into Iraq. Well, the same is true here. We are in a drug war, and it has an industrial complex that both launches us into it and sort of perpetuates our involvement in it. This war has been a loser now for 4 decades. We're 40 years in. We've spent $1 trillion. We've had 45 million drug arrests. And what do we have to show for it? Nothing. Drugs are cheaper, purer, more available than ever before. So what can possibly be propelling something that nobody agrees with? Well, the only thing that can be compelling it is a system of vested interests in its perpetuation. And that is this system, this mass system of profit-driven incarceration that we have in this country.
The war on drugs has taken a slightly different direction through each presidential administration over the last 40 years or so. In the Obama administration, though, in particular, over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, what's the difference been in the war on drugs?
Well, for a lot of us who saw Obama come in, we heard a lot of rhetoric at the time of the beginning of his first term that he was going to do great things to change the war on drugs. He brought in Gil Kierlikowski, his drug czar, and I met with the drug czar. And he said, don't call me a drug czar. We don't believe in that language. It's too tough on crime. We don't believe in that. We don't think it works. He said also, don't call it a drug war, because we don't think you should conduct a war on your own people. It's not a war on a drug, it's a war on people. And I said, well, this is great. There's a new sheriff in town, and he's a pretty right-thinking guy, and Gil has a great history reforming the drug war. But what I've seen ever since is 4 years of kind of business as usual. So the dangerous thing there is it's almost as if they continued the war by another name. And in that event, I'd rather you keep calling it a war, because as long as you have a war, you can have an anti-war movement. This war is wrong, it's destroying lives, and has been for decades. So keep calling it that until we have a real reform of it, where it stops being a war on a cross-section of the American people.
You really start thinking about the presidential election, both candidates talking about social issues a whole bunch,
Yes.
Not a lot of talk about drugs or drug use. Eugene,
Not a word about it.
Why has this
Sure.
left the national conversation? What happened?
Well, because it's failed, because the drug war should be called the failed drug war. So what public person wants to stand by it? What public person wants to say, I'm tough on crime anymore, when tough on crime has impeached itself as a national ideology? For decades, politicians used to love to talk about the drug war, and they used to love to come across as tough on crime. Well, when you discover that the evidence now shows you that tough on crime has been a complete disaster for this country, it has not reduced crime, it has only made a certain subset of the population rich at the expense, the mass expense of other Americans, who wants to stand by that and try to defend it? So what politicians now do is what the two candidates did on the campaign trail, and it's more and more common. You can't defend it, so you just go quiet and let it carry out its unholy business, sort of undisturbed and untalked about.
In your opinion, Eugene, and we take a look back at the last 40 years, and this is looking at the other side, has the war on drugs in any way, on any front, been successful, in any way being productive to American society?
I think it recognizes the problem of drug abuse, and it recognizes the danger that drugs can represent to individuals who suffer from drug affliction. The problem is it makes an immediate wrong turn at that point. Once recognizing the problem, which is a health problem, it is a matter inside yourself. I mean, imagine a friend of yours comes to you and says, hey, Terrell, I got to tell you, I'm addicted to this thing or that thing. Is the first thing you do with your friend to call the cops? Or no? You probably look for a gentle, medical, informed, compassion-based way, Christian, American, call it what you want. You look for a way into that person's problem that might help them construct a new path out of where they are. But instead what we do is we say, I understand your pain. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to double your pain. I'm going to take whatever you're already suffering from and I'm going to lock you up, and when you get out, you'll be even worse off than you are now, more inclined to use, and then when you use again, I'm going to put you away for longer. And then when that repeats, I'm going to turn you into the ever-growing recidivism statistics that are a plight in this country. And so at the end of the day, we simply went about this the wrong way, and we need to just rethink it, go back to the moment where we recognized it was a problem, and understand that drugs are a health problem, not a matter for criminal justice.
It is certainly a topic and an issue that will be talked about in the days, weeks, years to come. Director Eugene Jarecki joining us this morning. Eugene, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
His documentary is called The House I Live In, out in theaters right now.